Thanks, Johan. Thanks, guys. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for that very kind introduction. That backstory was the perfect lead-in to my presentation, so I really appreciate that. And before I get into the kind of details of what I'm going to talk about, I just want to highlight something that wasn't necessarily apparent in my introduction, which is that I am a Kiwi. I flew up this morning from my home in Christchurch. I've been here for almost 14 years now. I became a citizen in 2013, and I think it's important to highlight that right from the beginning, because I know you can tell from my accent that I'm not from here originally, and the alternative is a little embarrassing just at present. I know as soon as I say that I'm from America, what everybody's thinking, which is, what the heck is going on over there? And I bring this up not to make a political point. There might be people in this room who are Trump supporters. It's none of my business, although we should talk. But more because it's just so surprising that he's the president, right? Like, it's been 2 years and it's still, we're like, really? That's the guy? And that's not mean to say. Like, he was surprised when he won. Everybody was surprised by this. Every poll, every pundit, every editorial, like, everybody had this thing going the other way. Nate Silver, the guru statistician who rose to fame in the 2012 election for correctly anticipating every one of the 50 states, the morning of the 2016 election, this is how he had it pegged. 71% Clinton, 28% Trump. Everybody got this wrong. Except for this fish, which correctly ate off of a picture of Donald Trump instead of one of Hillary Clinton. And this artificially intelligent predictive system, which correctly anticipated the results of the election weeks out. So this is the kind of thing that's interesting to me. How is it possible that the humans are getting it so wrong and the computers are getting it so right? So this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about riding the exponential wave of change. And really what I'm going to be talking about is the future that we're heading into. And one of the lenses that I'm going to be using to talk about that future is the lens of this guy. This is Ray Kurzweil. He's one of the co-founders of Singularity University, which is an organization that I was involved with for a few years. He invented pretty much everything. He invented flatbed scanners. He invented optical character recognition. He invented text-to-speech for blind people. He invented the Kurzweil synthesizer. He's got 21 honorary doctorates. He's received honors from 3 US presidents. He's written 7 books, 5 of them bestsellers. He's a director of engineering at Google, like total underachiever. But one of the most interesting things about Ray is that they've gone back and looked at the predictions he's made about where technology is going since the late 80s, early 90s. And they found that he has an astonishing 86% accuracy rate. 86%, it's a tremendous achievement. If you think about some of the dramatic technological changes we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, 86% is really quite extraordinary. To the degree that he predicted that by 1998, a computer would beat a human at chess. And of course, in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov to that level of specificity. So when Ray Kurzweil says something about where technology is going, generally worth paying attention to him. So as Johan said, I first got involved with these guys at Singularity University about almost 4 years ago now. I did their executive program. It's a 6-day program at their headquarters at NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley. And I'll tell you what, I went to this program with my TEDx hat on. And my job as a TEDx curator is to be across new ideas, to be across new innovations, to pay attention to what's up and coming so that I can put it on my stage and share it with you. And so when I went to Singularity University, I thought, okay, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm sure I'm gonna learn lots. I'm really looking forward to it. I didn't expect it to completely transform my understanding of the nature of technological progression and to completely change the paradigm about how I look at the world, how this stuff affects us, how it affects not just our economy, but our government, our healthcare system, our education system. Every single thing about the way that we live and work is touched by this stuff, and not enough of us understand it. And I came away completely transformed, and I ended up shifting pretty much the entire trajectory of my career to having more conversations like this one so that collectively we can be more intentional and intelligent about the future we're creating. So I'm going to share with you, boil down pretty much everything I learned in those 6 days at Singularity University into 3 core insights. And the first one starts with this guy. So this is Gordon Moore. He's one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation. And in 1965, he made the observation that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 months as far back as we could see. And he made a prediction that that number would continue to double as far forward as we could see. This became known as Moore's Law. You've probably heard of it. So the first insight from Ray Kurzweil is that actually, what if it's not about the transistors at all? So fun fact you may not know about Moore's Law. Gordon Moore made his famous prediction based on a data set of 4. He had 4 data points. But Kurzweil zoomed out on that, and he said, what if, instead of looking at the number of transistors we can fit on an integrated circuit, we look instead at what we might call the price performance of computing. How many million instructions per second can you buy for $1,000? Turns out that number has been doubling for almost 120 years. Starting way back with the beginning of computing, with electromechanical punch cards, moving on to relays, and then vacuum tubes, and then transistors, and only then integrated circuits. Moore's Law is actually the 5th iteration of this underlying doubling paradigm, not the first. Kurzweil called it the law of accelerating returns. Here's a way to think about it. Today, for $1,000, you can buy roughly the number of instructions per second that a mouse brain can process. But according to Kurzweil, by about 2023, 5 years from now, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second that a human brain can process. And by 2049, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second of all human brains on the planet combined. Right. Insight number 1, not just about the transistors, it's about the price performance of computing. Kurzweil called this the law of accelerating returns. Insight number 2 is that it's not just about computing. This doubling phenomenon applies to any technology once it becomes what we call information-enabled. Think about something like photography. Photography used to be substrate-enabled. It was dependent on the physical film for you to do the thing. And then it became information-enabled, dependent instead on ones and zeros. And once that happened, it started to follow a doubling in price performance, much like computing. The first digital camera had a resolution of 0.01 megapixel. Today, you can get a 41 megapixel camera as part of a smartphone. So some of the technologies that have become information-enabled that are now starting to follow doubling curves, computing, obviously the base one, but also artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, gene sequencing, neuroscience, energy, all starting to become powered by information, powered by ones and zeros, and all starting to follow similar doubling curves. So why should we care? What's so important about these doubling curves? Well, it turns out they have a few characteristics that actually make them kind of imperative to pay attention to. And the first one is that they look flat for a really long time. And you'll know this if you ever tried to do that trick where you fold a piece of paper in half 8 times. Anybody ever try that trick? First fold is easy, second fold is easy, third fold is easy, easy, easy. Like, this trick is so dumb. Why am I even doing it? So easy. It's not until you hit that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper that things start to get a little crazy. And so these curves are inherently deceptive as the technology goes from 0.01 to 0.02 to 0.04 to 0.08. I mean, sure, it's doubling, but from the outside, it still effectively looks like 0. The second characteristic is that our brains are totally not wired for this stuff. We evolved on the savannah chasing prey and running from predators that behaved in a predictable, linear fashion. We evolved to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to that end of the room, not to understand that a lion could run from that end of the room to the moon. And so as a result, the experts continue to predict linear, no matter how much evidence we have to the contrary. Gordon Moore himself, twice, said that Moore's Law was over. Both times proven wrong. The guy who invented the law, he can't get his own law right. So I don't know what hope the rest of us have. But the difference between something following a linear trajectory and something following a doubling curve is insane. 30 linear steps, and we're back out at afternoon tea. 30 doubling steps, and we're 26 times around the planet. And the tricky thing there is that you're not halfway until the 29th step. So it's really hard to measure progress as you go. I don't think there's a single person in this room, myself included, who could correctly guess where we would be at step 15 of this process. Our brains do not work this way. And so when we see doubling curves in action, we have to be systematic and disciplined in our assessment and our analysis of them. if we want to have a hope of being able to respond effectively. I want to tell you a story to highlight just how difficult it is to get our heads around this stuff. It is really so difficult, and you might have heard this story before. This story is probably apocryphal. Let's not worry whether it is or not. Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. This is a story about the inventor of chess. The inventor of chess, back in the day, he invents chess. He comes up with this game. He goes to the king. He says, "Sire, I have invented this game, and I wish to gift it to you for the kingdom." And the king says, "This is a wonderful thing indeed that you have wrought. I wish to acknowledge you. How would you like to be rewarded?" And the inventor says, "I am but a humble man. I ask for not much, merely a single grain of wheat on the first square of the chessboard, and 2 on the second, and 4 on the third, and 8 on the fourth, until such time that the board should be full." And the king said to himself, "This man is very clever, but he knows not how to value himself." And he readily agrees to the inventor's request. Well, you can imagine where this is going. By the time the chessboard was full, the king would have owed the inventor of chess 18 quintillion grains of wheat. Put all those grains of wheat together, they come to something like 1.2 trillion metric tons of wheat. And to put that in context, the entire global output of wheat for all of 2017 was 753 million metric tons. So it's 1,600 times the entire global output of wheat for all of last year is what the king would have owed the inventor of chess. If you laid all of those grains of wheat end to end, they would reach Alpha Centauri and back. And to really drive home how super, super difficult it is to get our heads around this stuff, I want you to think to yourself, where do you reckon he would be when he's halfway? Where do you reckon he would be at the 32nd square of the chessboard? So I start working this through. I'm like, okay, when we're at the 64th square of the chessboard, we're at 1.2 trillion metric tons. So half of that is 600 billion, but it's not half because this is exponential. So let's reduce that by an order of magnitude. Let's say it's 600 million. Actually, no, I'm sure we're going to get caught out. Let's reduce that by another order of magnitude. Let's say it's 600,000. Let's actually be super conservative because I know it's going to be, let's say it's 100,000. Let's say it's 10,000. The actual number is 279. So hard to get our heads around this stuff. While we're enjoying the rest of this afternoon, I want you to be thinking about what it feels like to stand at the knee of that curve. What does it feel like to stand at that point where you go from 279 to 1.2 trillion? What does it feel like to stand at that point where we go from nothing into everything, that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper? And I used to show this from the wonderful blog waitbutwhy.com. I highly recommend. He wrote a 2-part series on artificial intelligence, which if you enjoy my talk is essential reading. So I used to show this chart, and I would ask people, what does it feel like to stand at this curve? And I stopped doing it because it's kind of a trick question. So I would ask people, and they'd say things like, oh, it feels overwhelming, or it feels exciting, or it feels scary, right? All these like intense adjectives. But the truth is, it doesn't feel like any of these things. It feels like nothing. Because our tendency, when we think about what the future is going to look like, is to look backwards, take our experience from history, and turn around and use that to project forwards. We do not feel that acceleration as it's happening. Again, why we have to be systematic and disciplined in our assessment and our analysis of this stuff if we want to have a hope of being able to respond effectively. I'm going to tell you a non-apocryphal story to drive this stuff home. So when I first came back from Singularity University, beginning of 2015, I started giving these talks, and I would always include some whiz-bangy technology, like, oh my gosh, can you believe this technology is already here, this kind of shock and awe stuff. That's not what I want you to take away from my talk. That's not the critical message. The critical message is not about what technology is available at any given point in time. That is almost immaterial. The critical message that I want you to take away from my talk is about how technology changes over time. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I've had kind of a front row seat to see what this looks like. So I want to talk you through this using one example. You may have seen this story from 2016, I think March of 2016, I think it was. DeepMind, an artificial intelligence company, came out with an artificially intelligent Go player called AlphaGo. And in early 2016, AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol, the world champion at the game of Go. This was an incredible accomplishment. The game of Go, probably the most complex game we've ever invented. The number of possible moves in Go, many orders of magnitude greater than the number of atoms in the universe. This happened fully a decade before the researchers expected it to happen. It was an unbelievable accomplishment. About a year later, DeepMind came out with a new artificially intelligent Go player. So the new player is called AlphaGo Zero. The original AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol. That's Lee Sedol realizing he's out of a job. The original AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol 4-1. AlphaGo Zero beat AlphaGo 100-0, which already is amazing. But even more interesting is how they trained it. So typically with an AI, you want to train it, you have to feed it tons of data. You want to train your AI to recognize pictures of cats. You feed it millions of pictures of cats and millions of pictures of not cats, and it ingests all those images and it starts to extrapolate patterns. It parses all that data and it says, okay, what kind of patterns are present in pictures of cats that are not present in pictures of not cats? And so it'll say, okay, so if it's a cat, it's got maybe 2 pointy ears, but maybe one of them's chewed off, so it's also got eyes that look like this and whiskers and whatever, but maybe that's just me holding a cat mask, so it also has a body that looks like this and a tail. And it starts to be able to, figure out what are all the patterns that make it so that this is a cat or this is not a cat. And then when you give it a new image, it can look at that and go, look. It can look at it and go, oh, yep, that's a cat, or no, that's not a cat. It's gross oversimplification, but that's broadly the way that it works, right? And with the original AlphaGo, that's exactly what they did. They fed it 40 million historic games of Go. It parsed all that data, was able to extrapolate patterns, and at any given moment was able to figure out what is the best move for me to make. But with AlphaGo Zero, they didn't feed it a single game. They gave it the rules, and they gave it the desired outcome. And they let it play itself, starting with random play. Literally, any move will do. It played itself 4.9 million times, and within 3 days was the best Go player in the world. When we hit that inflection point, that 6th, 7th, 8th fold of the paper, we go from nothing into everything seemingly overnight. And I don't want anyone left saying, it came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. Right. Insight number 1. It's not just about the transistors. It's about the price performance of computing. Insight number 2, it's not just about computing. It's about any information-enabled technology. Insight number 3 is that these technologies are now starting to converge. So now we have to consider what happens when an exponential progression in something like artificial intelligence converges with an exponential progression in robotics. We get super intelligent robots. What happens when an exponential progression in biotechnology or bioengineering converges with an exponential progression in 3D printing at the molecular level, when we can literally print matter molecule by molecule? And of course, what happens is that everything accelerates even faster. I want to do a poll. I'm going to do a super low-tech poll. I want to do a poll of how you feel about this stuff. When I talk to you about this stuff, when I'm talking about this insane technological progression and the acceleration that we're experiencing, and you're thinking about what does this mean for our society and what does this mean for our future, let's just do a quick show of hands. How many people feel like this? How many feel like this? Show of hands. Don't be shy. There's no wrong answer here. How many feel like this? Hands up. How many feel like this? How many didn't put your hands up at all? You guys... Okay, come on. I'm going to try again. How many feel like this? Put your hand up for one or the other. How many feel like this? How many feel more like this? It's not binary, but more like this. And how many people feel more like this? Okay, you're all right. This is F. Scott Fitzgerald. He said the mark of a first-rate mind is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts simultaneously and still retain the ability to function. There are a lot of things about the world that we're heading into that keep me up at night, and I'm going to touch on a few. I'm going to touch on 5 of them. 5 might seem like a big number. There are many more than 5. But I want to talk about 5 of the things that keep me up at night when I think about the direction that we're heading in with technology. The first one is technological unemployment. In 2013, a now famous paper from Frey and Osborne suggested that 47 to 81% of jobs, as we currently understand them, would be under threat from technology within 20 years. In 2016, the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand said that that number was 46% of Kiwi jobs under threat from technology. This is a factory in Shanghai. It's a pretty new factory. It belongs to a company called JD.com. JD.com is an e-commerce giant, like an Amazon kind of company or an eBay. This is one of their fulfillment centers, so it's where you place your order and it gets pulled from this warehouse and put into a box and shipped to you. They process 200,000 orders every single day. Every day, pick, pack, ship, 200,000 orders. They have 4 staff. 4 staff. It is not just it's not just repetitive manual labor that is under threat, it is also repetitive cognitive labor. This is one of those topics that we can easily stay up until 2 in the morning debating over whiskey, and I'm more than happy to do that. It's an intensely nuanced topic. There are as many papers saying that technology is going to create new jobs as there are papers saying technology is going to take away all the jobs. It's one that is under fierce debate all the time. What I can tell you, though, is that as of right now today, we are not experiencing an increase in unemployment as a direct result of automation. But what we are experiencing as of right now today as a direct result of automation is an increase in inequality. In March this year, the Brookings Institute came out with a study showing that automation may not be labor displacing, but it does exacerbate existing inequalities, tending to drive wealth towards the holders of capital and away from labor. And we've been seeing this increase in inequality since the mid-70s, when for the first time in human history, we were able to decouple productivity growth from wage growth. And the thing that worries me about this is that if I were a politician, I could get up here and say, everything is awesome. Productivity is high, unemployment's low, we're doing great. And yet for a huge chunk of the population, and as we all know, teachers well among them, everything is very much not awesome. And what happens when you have this disconnect between the top-level narrative and the lived reality for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of millions, billions of people, is you get somebody like Trump elected. You get someone like Bernie Sanders coming to the fore. You get Brexit. You get this guy in Brazil. You get people marching in the streets in New Zealand. These are all symptoms of the manifestations of the same underlying phenomenon, which is the idea that the system is not working for me. That's the second thing that keeps me up at night. The third thing that keeps me up at night is increased cyber risk. When everything is connected, everything is vulnerable, and everything is connected. Our lights are connected. Our fridges are connected. My friend David Roberts has a cup that's connected to the internet. It's a cup. It's like the most basic technology we have in the world, and his cup, for some reason, has to be able to talk to other cups on the internet. A couple months ago in Las Vegas, there was a hack. These hackers got into a high roller database. They got in through a connected fish tank in the lobby. Everything is connected, and the scale of damage that people can do is absolutely insane. A couple months ago in the States, the Department of Justice arrested a few people associated with this Fin7 hacking group. These guys have stolen over $1 billion around the world. It's one small group. The scale of what you can do when everything is connected versus a time when you had to be a nation state in order to accomplish anything of significance is just off the charts. And our response to this stuff is totally inadequate. Earlier this year, there was a worm that had infected something like half a million routers, a Russian worm. Basically, any router that was infected with this worm, the hackers could look at all the content that was coming through the router, all your content, all your passwords, everything that was going through your router. And the US FBI's official response to this development was, have you tried turning it off and on again? No joke. They put out a public service announcement saying, please reboot your routers. Any of you guys ever deal with help desk? How many people do you think followed that advice from the FBI? Probably not very many. Right, fourth thing keeps me up at night, algorithmic bias. We live in a world where almost anything we want to do, whether it is take an airplane, go to university, get a credit card, get a mortgage, get a job, almost anything we want to do is increasingly governed by an algorithm, and those algorithms are increasingly opaque to us. I'll give you one example of the kind of bias that I'm concerned about. In Florida, there's an algorithm called Compass. It's used to inform parole decisions. It doesn't make the decision, but it spits out a recommendation that goes to the parole board. What they find with this algorithm, two things. One is that it is, when they analyze its results versus actual outcomes for defendants, what they find is that it is likely to make mistakes for defendants of color on the side of saying that they're going to reoffend. In other words, it's more likely to say they're going to reoffend when they won't. And for white defendants, it is more likely to say they will not reoffend when they will. So it makes mistakes by saying that this person should be granted parole when they shouldn't. That's bad enough. They also find, when they analyze the results of this algorithm, that it is no better than asking half a dozen random people on the street. I don't know about you guys, but if my life were in the hands of an algorithm, I would at least want to know that it is better at its job than half a dozen random people on the street. But what we're experiencing with these things is that these algorithms are embedding our historic biases and injustices into them. And therefore, instead of being predictive, they are generative. They are embedding and creating the very biases that we have experienced throughout history. That's the fourth thing I'm worried about. The fifth thing that keeps me up at night, undermining of trust in our civil society. If you've seen this video, you probably don't want to admit it. This is the face of Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, superimposed onto the body of a porn star. This video was uploaded to a website called Step Siblings Caught, purporting to show her having sex with her stepbrother. It was created using a technology called deep fakes, which allows you to superimpose video of someone's face onto video of someone else's body. When they first came out with this kind of tech, you had to be pretty savvy in order to create something like this. But within about 10 minutes, somebody created a super user-friendly version, so now anybody can do something like this. And that can be cool. You can make video of yourself dancing like Bruno Mars. You can make a video of your spouse starring in the Avengers, right? You can do fun things with this, but obviously you can also do malicious things. Combine that with technology that we have that allows you to use your face as a remote control for somebody else's face. So this guy on the right is using his face to control the face of Donald Trump. On the left, he smiles, Trump smiles, he frowns, Trump frowns. This is using an off-the-shelf commodity webcam, no special equipment. Combine that with technology we have that allows you to generate convincing audio in anyone's voice, and you get situations like this one.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
I love Jordan Peele because he makes it funny, but it's kind of terrifying if you really think about it. But remember F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? Two opposing thoughts simultaneously. By many metrics, 2017 was the best year ever in human history. In 2017, the smallest share of our population ever was hungry, impoverished, or illiterate. Every single day in 2017, 217,000 people were lifted up out of extreme poverty. Every single day in 2017, 325,000 people gained access to electricity, and every single day in 2017, 300,000 people gained access to clean water. In 2017, for the first time ever in certain parts of the world, it became cheaper to build and operate a new solar plant than it was to maintain an existing coal plant. Think about that for a second. Cheaper to build and operate new than maintain existing. All of the sunk cost arguments go completely out the window, and all of a sudden the right thing to do for the planet aligns with the right thing to do for your bottom line, and that is when we see transformative tipping point change. Johan talked about the plastic problem in Maharashtra in India, home to 120 million people. They have now banned all single-use plastics. In the EU, last night, they voted 571 to 53 lawmakers to ban 10 types of single-use plastic, including straws. Absolutely transformative tipping point change. We now have breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs that are leading to a $100 ultrasound machine that plugs into and is powered by your phone. Think about that for a second. Every woman everywhere in New Zealand, every rural community in New Zealand, all of a sudden, access to ultrasounds in a way that has been completely impossible up until now. I gave a presentation, I ran a workshop, it was about a year ago with Ministry of Health, and there was a woman there who runs the Midwives Association of New Zealand, and I started talking about this stuff, and at the end of the day, I had a chat with her, and she said, you know, you start talking at the beginning, you're talking about technology, and I was just like, I don't want to hear about it. You know, my job is to walk alongside these women as they're going through their journey, and when you're talking about tech, all I'm thinking about is how this tech is going to stand in between me and the women I'm here to serve. And she goes, but with this, all of a sudden, this enables me to serve them in ways that would absolutely not be possible otherwise. She goes, I'm meeting with a woman in far Northland, and I'm saying, you need to get an ultrasound. And she's like, right, okay, so we need to call the GP, get the GP to make a referral, call the referral, book in the thing. That's going to be in a week. I've got to drive. It's a 6-hour drive for me to get down there. I've got to take time off work. I got to find the petrol money. It's never going to happen. And so instead of that, now all of a sudden she goes, you need an ultrasound. Let's do it right here. Done. And you know that thing about algorithmic bias that I'm so concerned about, you want to know who's super biased? We are, humans. We're the worst. Like, turns out that the algorithms, in many ways, are actually better than we are. You know, they do these studies where they're looking at sentencing decisions made by judges, and they find that the sentencing decisions are much harsher just before lunch because the judges are hangry. Like, that's not okay, right? It's not okay, and you can't solve for that. With a biased algorithm, if you can identify that it is biased, you can solve for it. We can make a conscious decision to design our algorithms to be aspirational instead of reflective of history. And this technology is opening the door to doing that. So many opportunities. What does this mean for you guys? So one of the things that I notice is that typically when we think about this stuff, it's so hard to imagine a world that doesn't look like the present, right? So the question that we always have is, okay, what are the jobs that we're going to be training people for? Those jobs don't exist yet. So what do we need to do? Oh, we need to teach kids more STEM. We need to teach them coding. Everybody has to learn coding. That has to be a mandatory part of. We need to teach them coding from when they're 5. We have a plushy toy robot that allows kids to learn coding. And maybe, you know, it's a useful way to think. But the future might not look anything like the present. There's a real possibility that in the future, we're not going to be coding computers. We're going to be training them the way that we train dogs, just like they trained AlphaGo Zero. They don't know how that artificially intelligent Go player did what it did. They told it what they wanted it to achieve, and they gave it the rules of the game, and then it worked it out for itself. So we can't just be simplistic in our response to this and say, oh, the magic wand, the magic bullet solution is to teach every kid to code. I'm not saying we shouldn't teach kids to code. I'm saying that is not a universal panacea solution. So what are the marketable skills that we're looking at heading for the future? Well, it's basically anything that is creative. The theme of this conference is creative, and every single person in the future will have to be creative in some way. Because creativity is the thing we have not mastered. We've mastered it in artificial forms. They have, you know, AIs now that are making, that are writing movie scripts. They have AIs that are generating music. They have AIs that are generating artworks. But the ability to think for yourself and decide that at this moment I'm going to do something a little bit unexpected or a little bit unusual or something that is a decision that comes from within me as opposed to something that I've been told to do, that is the skill that has not been replaced and that we are a long way from replacing. So yes, solving unstructured problems, working with new information, non-routine tasks, creativity, creativity, creativity. The World Economic Forum came out recently with their list of skills for the 21st century. Again, about a year ago, I did a presentation for the early childhood educators of New Zealand, and I love this list because you've got all the kind of, you know, hard skills on the left, literacy and numeracy and scientific literacy, et cetera. But basically, skills 7 through 16 adaptability, curiosity, communication, collaboration. This is like everything that we're focused on in early childhood education. We need to bring that absolutely through every single aspect of our education and every single aspect of our adult lives in this journey of continuous learning we're going to have to be on. You guys probably know this lady, Sue Suckling. She's not with NZQA anymore, right? She stepped down. I think she was chair of NZQA. I think she might have stepped down. She spoke at the Singularity U New Zealand Summit at the end of 2016. And she had this to say. She said, we're moving away from a world of compulsory attendance and towards a world of global participation, away from pre-entry criteria and towards open access, away from fees and towards free, away from institutional rules and towards virtual, away from NZQA and towards the blockchain. And since she gave this talk, NZQA has moved to looking at micro-credentialing and adapting to a different kind of context. And MIT just last week announced plans to create a $1 billion school devoted entirely to AI. This is now their new focus. It's no longer about individual bits and pieces, individual lines of code. It's about how we can rethink everything that we're doing in the context of artificial intelligence. But you guys aren't just educators, you are leaders. And so I want to talk to you about some thoughts that I have about how leaders should be thinking about these trends and trajectories. And leadership is one of those words like sustainability, right? Like everybody has their own definition for it. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of PhD programs on leadership. I haven't done one of them. I am not any kind of expert on leadership, but I have made some observations about some of the characteristics that I think are essential for leadership in a world that is changing as rapidly as ours is. And I just want to share 3 of them with you. So the first one is the ability to think from first principles. One of the things I've noticed is that when we're faced with extreme disruption, I showed this slide earlier, this jobs that don't exist yet. When we're faced with extreme disruption, our initial response, our knee-jerk response tends to be, how can we adapt so that we can keep doing what we've been doing? So if I have a big company, how can I adapt so that I can keep having my big company? I have a school, how can I adapt so that kids keep coming to my school? What we struggle with often is questioning the underlying assumptions behind the structure as it currently exists. And that's what first principles thinking calls upon us to do. So the kind of questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves as a society are things like, what is the purpose of the corporation? What is the purpose of education? Is this the best way to structure society? And how should we define success? These, again, super thorny questions we can easily stay up till 2 in the morning discussing. I'm going to just have a go at 1 or 2 of them. The first question, what is the purpose of the corporation? Most people, if you say, what is the purpose of the corporation, will say, the purpose of the corporation is to return money to shareholders. I was in a board meeting yesterday where someone literally said exactly that. If you ask people on the street, most people on the street believe that it is in fact the law. The law is that the purpose of the corporation is to generate returns for shareholders, but it's not the law at all. It's an idea. It's an idea that was put forward by this guy. This is Milton Friedman. He wrote it in an article in 1970 that was published in the New York Times. And it's an idea that has become so pervasive and so ingrained in our society that we forget that it's an idea that can be challenged. And it absolutely should be challenged because it's kind of nuts, if you think about it, to have social enterprises over here and sort of real companies over here. It doesn't make any sense at all. And even if you go with the argument that corporations are legal persons, it still doesn't make any sense because you and I, as human persons, don't just have legal and financial responsibilities. We have moral and civic responsibilities. If my neighbor's car isn't starting, I'm going to help her jumpstart her car. I'm going to show up at the kids' footy. I'm going to help out with the parent-teacher association. I'm going to, my colleague is having a hard time at home, or someone close to her passes away. I'm going to look after her. Like, these are things that we do as human individuals, and it's totally insane that we don't have any kind of moral and civic standard for the companies that govern so much of our lives. We have this idea that we have to have a 40-hour-a-week job. This is one of the things when we think about what's the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to train kids so that they can get a job. That's also an idea that we've invented. There's no law in physics that has anything to do with having a job. A job is a social invention, right? It's something that we came up with as a society. It's not something that exists in nature. You know what is a law of physics is work. Not jobs, work. Work, when you think of work as the doing of things and the solving of problems, that's a totally different mindset to this idea that we have to have a 40-hour-a-week job, right? Totally different mindset, the doing of things and the solving of problems. If we're worried about jobs, then we're going to get super bent out of shape about technological unemployment and about wage growth and about all this other stuff. But if we worry about the doing of things and the solving of problems, we will never be short of things to do because we have so many problems to worry about, so many things that we can be solving, so much stuff that we can be doing to make the world a better place for ourselves and for each other. We will never grow tired of solving these problems if we shift our focus. And really, the problems are so present and so immediate. You guys will have seen that report from the IPCC recently that basically says that we've got, a decade to turn things around before climate change is pretty much irreversible. I don't know if you saw this. The government of Australia, after that report came out, they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to stick with coal. We think coal is, we don't want to change our policy based on some kind of report. That would be silly. Lots of problems to solve, lots of things to be doing. All right, first principles thinking. Second thing that I want to talk about in terms of leadership, moral character. Often when I talk about technology with people, the questions that they ask me are questions based on the idea of can we? Can we automate this? Can we get a robot to do that? Can we make this process, whatever? Can we use AI for this? Can we teach every kid to code? Can we? And the answer to that question is pretty much always yes. Can we? Yes. It's either yes or soon. Not yet, right? Not yet, but soon. Can we automate this? Yes, we can. Can we get a robot to do this? Yes, we can. Can a robot do backflips? Yes, it can. Can it run parkour courses? Yes, it can. It's the wrong question. The question we need to be asking is not can we, but should we? I hear people saying that they want to be the Silicon Valley of. We want to be the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. We want to be the Silicon Valley of Europe. We want to be the Silicon Valley of the Southern Hemisphere. And I would argue that ambition is not an admirable ambition at all. There is an absolute dearth of moral character and moral leadership coming out of Silicon Valley, whether it's the now disgraced chief executive of Uber, Travis Kalanick, who openly encouraged illegal practices within the organization under his growth at any cost ambitions, whether it's the now disgraced founder of Theranos, a blood company that promised to be able to do 20 different analyses based on a single drop of your blood that was all a complete fabrication. And the reason that moral leadership is important is because the scale at which we're operating means that a tiny deviation has massive consequences, right? There are 2 billion people who use Facebook consistently. 2 billion people. I think it's 1.6 billion every single day. 2 billion active users of this platform. And I don't know if you've seen some of the challenges that they've had in terms of moderating hate speech, in terms of controlling what comes through your news feed, in terms of literally life and death results for people in certain areas where sectarian divisions have been inflamed by the algorithmic filters that govern what people see on their Facebook feeds. 2 billion people, like anything at that scale is problematic. A few marshmallows are delicious. 2 billion marshmallows are fucking dangerous. We have to be careful. All right. First characteristic of leadership is first principles thinking. Second characteristic is moral character. Third characteristic of leadership is agency. And really to touch on the agency conversation, I want to invite this guy, Dave Meslin, to talk to you about it.
Heroes. How do we view leadership? Look at these 10 movies. What do they have in common? Anyone? They all have heroes who were chosen. Someone came up to them and said, you're the chosen one. There's a prophecy. You have to save the world. And then someone goes off and saves the world because they've been told to, with a few people tagging along. This helps me understand why a lot of people have trouble seeing themselves as leaders, because it sends all the wrong messages about what leadership is about. A heroic effort is a collective effort, number one. Number two, it's imperfect. It's not very glamorous, and it doesn't suddenly start and suddenly end. It's an ongoing process your whole life. But most importantly, it's voluntary. It's voluntary. As long as we're teaching our kids that heroism starts when someone scratches a mark on your forehead, or someone tells you that you're part of a prophecy, they're missing the most important characteristic of leadership, which is that it comes from within. It's about following your own dreams uninvited, and then working with others to make those dreams come true.
I love this message so much. I listen to this talk all the time. I cannot get enough of it. And I love it so much because I present to people like you who are explicitly characterized as leaders. And then I'll present sometimes to community groups people who don't necessarily see themselves as leaders. And what I want everyone to understand is that every single one of us has the opportunity to demonstrate leadership every single day in every interaction that we have with another human being. Every time you talk to your spouse, every time you talk to your kids, every time you talk to your staff, every time you talk to a waiter or a waitress or the petrol attendant or the person who sits next to you, every single time that we do these things, we are making a vote with our behavior about how we think it is okay to be in the world. Every one of those votes is a demonstration of leadership and can be a demonstration of leadership. And I think as people who are explicit leaders, such as yourselves, that the most important thing we can do for our kids is to help them see that in themselves. This is what he said, uninvited, coming from within. This is literally the definition of creativity. I was chatting earlier with someone who's involved with the organization of the conference, and we were talking about the theme here, and we were talking about the arts, and I get kind of antsy when I hear people tie creativity to the arts. Because yes, we need the arts in every aspect of our lives because we need them to nourish our soul and we need them to help us interrogate who we are as human beings and we need them to provoke us and to question us and all that. Yes, I am a huge fan of the arts. My father was an actor. I love being on stage. I'll sing for you if you want. I love the arts, okay? I'm all for it. But creativity does not equal the arts. Because if we think creativity equals the arts, we are diminishing the role of creativity in every aspect of our lives. We want our kids to be creative in everything that they do, in the way that they think about problem solving, in the way that they think about their careers, in the way that they think about their relationships, in the way that they think about who they are going to become and what kind of humans they're going to be in this world. We want them to be deploying creativity. So I love Dave Meslin for that. I just want to close. I'm almost done here, but I just want to close with this story. It's a story I love so much. The guy on the right is my friend Steve Sammartino. He's a crazy marketer, venture capitalist guy from Melbourne. And the kid on the left is this guy, Raul Oida. He's from Romania. And a few years back, Raul woke up one day in Romania, and he decided that he wanted to be the rocket king of Romania. And no one had ever sent up a rocket ever before in Romania, so all he had to do was send up one rocket, and mission accomplished, achievement unlocked. He would be the rocket king of Romania. And so he started investigating who can help him on this quest that he has to be the rocket king. He starts looking up what it would take and how he could do it, whatever, and who could help him. And somehow he stumbled across Steve. I'm a little unclear as to how he found Steve. Had a friend, I think, who was an astronaut, and maybe this kid saw that they were connected on LinkedIn or something. Anyway, so this kid starts cold stalking Steve on the internet. And Steve starts this, chatting with him. And the kid would sit up until like 2 in the morning in Romania until it was, 7 a.m. in Melbourne. And Steve would wake up and the kid would be like, let me tell you the latest about my rocket, and, hound him. And Steve, he sort of took a liking to him and ended up sending him a bit of money to get, it sounds really dodgy. It's not dodgy, I promise. So ended up sending him a bit of money to buy some of the bits for his rocket. And the kid ends up sending up his rocket. He achieves his dream. He becomes the rocket king of Romania. And these guys maintain their friendship. And long story short, Steve ends up bringing the kid to Australia, and they build this car, which is a full-size car made out of Lego that runs on air. It is awesome. It's a super awesome micro project. You can look it up. It's a fantastic story. But the reason I tell this story and the thing that I love so much about it is that the way that Steve tells it, at every point along the way, when he would say to the kid, what are you going to do about the flux capacitor or whatever? The kid would say, no problem, I buy on eBay, $39, no problem. And when it came time to build a car and build the engine, they went on the largest online platform in the world, YouTube, and they found a video of someone who had built an engine that runs on air, a much smaller one, and they watched that video to figure out how it was done, and then they scaled it up to build the engine for this car. And the thing that I love about what this kid did is that he didn't go to school to become an engineer and then graduate with his engineering degree and then look around and say, what do I want to do with these engineering skills I've just acquired? What this kid did was he decided what he wanted to do. He wanted to build a car out of Lego that runs on air. And then he looked around and ad hoc brought in all of the skills, resources, champions, allies, everything that he needed in order to make that dream possible. That's the kind of shift that we need to have in terms of how we're training our kids to think. It's a shift I like to think about in terms of the shift from skiing to surfing. Skiing is challenging. Sure, you need a lot of skill to ski, but the mountain largely stays put. But when you're surfing, you have to be adapting constantly to that wave that is ever changing underneath you, and every single wave is different. And if you're not prepared to do something entirely different with every single wave, you're never going to master it. It's that kind of mindset shift that I want people to come on with me. I feel like often as educators, or when we're talking about the education system, we think that our biggest challenge is how we are going to prepare young people for society. But if we can achieve that mindset shift, and if we can elicit that agency, that sense of leadership in every child, then we're not focusing on this challenge. We're focusing on a bigger, and I think better challenge, which is what kind of a society do we want to live in? What kind of a society do we want them to create? Thank you very much.